Not expected to learn about that. Movement competency is next door, but I think basically on the topic of, especially around the stuff that we said around injury incidences and some of the things around, mental and physical fatigue and the issues that we just raised next door, this next session is going to be really important around some practical strategies that schools can use to help address these areas. So our first speaker is Aaron Ryan. So he's a chartered physiotherapist and he's been working at Millfield School for over 10 years. So probably one of the only really long-term established physiotherapists within a school. So learning a lot from his insight. He spent a large proportion of his career within the education sector, developing therapy services and ensuring integration within the educational environment as well. He's also worked within the NHS and private practice, as well as the English Institute of Sport, British Swimming and Bristol City Women's and the Lionesses. So Aaron's presentation will focus on some practical steps that schools can take to enhance the injury prevention, including auditing, planning and methods. So round of applause, off to you, Aaron.
Morning, thank you very much, Fionn. Thanks for the invite to come and talk today. What I want to do this morning is give you some things that you can take away with you and implement tomorrow, hopefully. Off the basis of the 17 years that I've been working in this type of setting. So I'm not going to try and preach from a Millfield-centric point of view and tell you all that we've got it right and we know what we're doing, because we don't. We're trying things. And as you can see from here, that we're blessed with human resource, which we're very fortunate to have. It allows us to try things on an annual basis and use our research that we produce within our setting and the auditing that we'll talk about later to come up with ideas and see if they stick. But that's very much a work in progress still. And Tom and I were collaborating on our presentations. And Tom coined the idea that there isn't a perfect environment that exists out there at the moment, and I think that's absolutely right. And we all should be striving to try and sort of collaborate as much as possible and being able to make this stick as much as possible. As you can see, obviously we've got well-resourced physiotherapy and athletic development departments supported by psychologists, nutrition support from our partner Chartwell's, and performance analysts as well. So what the aims of this next sort of 20 minutes or so is, why complete injury prevention, what's the purpose? And it may not be what it does on, or what it says on the tin. What the types of injury prevention work we focus our resources to give us the biggest bang for our buck. But what are the barriers that we need to overcome to make it stick within our environments? How do we understand better the injury picture within our environments? And hopefully there's some good work already being done out there, but hopefully there's a few things I can give you that will point you in the right direction, if not. And then what do we do about it ultimately? What can you take away and implement tomorrow? So I guess really what are the goals? And like I said, when you look at the research, reducing the risk of injury for coaches and athletes isn't a primary aim. It's not desirable. They don't want to think about it until it happens. So we need to be creative about how we sell this to our coaching staff and our athletes or our students. So as educationists, we want our students to be engaged with their sports as much as possible. That consistency of engagement with tactical and technical practice and competition helps them develop, as we heard next door, in the best way possible. So we want to enhance that development. If our students are having long periods out of sport due to injury, that, as we know from the COVID pandemic, if we take someone out of that educational environment for long periods of time, that hampers that development and the outcome is not as good as it could be. So we need to ensure that they're engaged as much as possible within their sports and enhancing their skill sets, whether that's our student who wants to turn up on a Wednesday and Saturday and play with their friends and take that on to their lifelong love of sport, or whether that's our elite performer who's going to go on to professional sports environments where injury prevention becomes bread and butter of their daily lives. We need to make sure that we're focusing on that development opportunity, and injury prevention helps and engage consistently throughout that development. And then again, the next big thing really when you talk to our young people and coaches especially is this idea around enhancing performance. If you said to a student that you've got, we can make you better at what you do, They bite your hand off. They're always looking for the next thing that they can do to improve their performance over their peers or over their competition. And there's a growing body of evidence that engaging with injury prevention will actually enhance that performance element. So we need to be creative about how we sell it, and not just say we want to reduce your risk of injury, because no one cares about that bit until it happens. So we need to be really focusing on these first 2 points more so when we're talking about strategy. So 3 key pillars of injury prevention, and today's methods that I'm going to talk about later are going to be around this primary prevention area. We'll talk about monitoring towards the end, and that goes very much into where Tom's talk will come on to. And there's this blurring or blending of primary and secondary prevention strategies through monitoring. How can we understand the risk profile of our athletes, our students, and then intervene when we see small problems that are occurring, whether that be through fatigue or intrinsic risk factors that we can modify. So that's a method there that will cross those 2 boundaries. Now, it's really important to say what I'm going to present to you today isn't foolproof. It's not going to be a panacea and stop all injuries from occurring. But when the inevitable does happen, and we get to that sort of tertiary prevention phase, when they have to see someone like myself, we're then trying to identify and rectify any injury risk factors that may be present. And then we're trying to make our athletes or students as bulletproof as possible when they return to play, to make sure that they don't have a reoccurrence of the injury they presented with to us. So those are sort of where our sort of primary aims are going to be around this primary and secondary prevention strategies. But why doesn't it stick in environment? What are the barriers? These 4 main barriers really come from not only coach perceptions, but also athlete perceptions. My current MSc project has been on the lived experience of adolescent and adult athletes around injury prevention and how they view it. And these were very much themes that came out of that piece of work. Coaches generally don't feel empowered or educated well enough to be able to provide injury prevention to our students. So therefore, it doesn't get done. Whereas they're very much more confident with the tactical and technical practices. They don't feel they've got enough resource education around this, so it doesn't get implemented. Therefore, we know that our students don't get exposed to that injury prevention, and we know learning for our students in injury prevention will become through exposure. So therefore, they don't take that forward, and they're not empowered to take ownership of their injury prevention journey as they move on and transition into other environments. So we need to address that barrier up front with CPD options, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. And then it was really timely that Kevin talked about the story around his son earlier, and that goes into this psychosocial environment that is often created within certain sports or around certain sports. And we have this idea of the sports ethic where we can generate great traits in our young people through exposure to the attritional nature of sport and the competition elements. But sometimes this gets taken too far and turns into a negative. So we get this idea of win at all costs. So we get the celebration of personal sacrifice through injury for the individuals within our settings, so that it's seen as a badge of honour, or you put yourself so far through that for your teammates that you put yourself last and ended up with an injury. When Tom and I were talking, we mentioned this idea of play at all costs, and what we've got to remember here as well that our students have a very small frame of reference in terms of their sporting careers, so they will often see the next competition opportunity as the biggest competition they're ever going to be involved in. So they won't want to, present with an injury or report pain or suffering in that sense, because they feel that it will hamper their development long term. So we need to be really cognizant of that and create strategies where it becomes safe environments to look after their own health and well-being and report any injuries or problems. The other bit to point out there with our adolescent athletes especially is that they won't use pain as a marker of injury. They'll often wait until there's a full breakdown in physical function before they will admit that they're injured. So we need to be on the ball with that and help support them through those strategies of support and mechanisms. Coaches will often tell me that time's the biggest constraint. I've only got 3 hours of contact time with my students a week. Why would I want to spend an hour of that doing injury prevention? And I get that. However, what I would always argue back is actually the cumulative time loss from multiple students having injuries where they're out of sport for 4 weeks plus is a greater cost at the end of the day than providing that injury prevention up front. So it's almost that least cost as your first cost. And if we're looking for teams to be successful, we need our better players or all of our students to be involved as much as possible. And that upfront cost is going to be less than the subsequent cost. And then we talk about this sort of idea of physical environment, and not to step on Tom's toes, but we hopefully I'll prevent some strategies in terms of you don't need lots of all singing or dancing equipment and facilities to provide adequate injury prevention. But we also need to understand that our environments are chaotic. So we have lots of nuance around enforced off seasons. We have 3 big holidays a year. For a lot of our students are just enforced deload periods, so they come back into a competitive period in another sport with little or no preparation for that off the back of the last term. So we need to be aware of that. We have the variability in physical and cognitive loading across the year. It's exam season now. If we were to stress our students with lots of high demand physical stress right now, their injury risk profile goes up. So we need to be aware of that when we're planning our years. Cultural constraints in our school, Fiona, remember this, maybe house song at Millfield. You have to go and practice house song. You're not allowed, you don't engage with your sports practice during that period of time, so you all rehearse together. So we all have these cultural nuances that take our students away from our contact time during certain parts of the year. We have then our multi-sport athletes that are pulled in lots of different directions, and we've heard the word silos used, and again that's a risk point for those athletes. They're often our better able athletes. They're pulled in lots of different directions. We need to be looking after them and creating strategies around prevention for those guys. Our early specialisation sports like tennis and swimming, for example, if that's not dosed in the right way and not managed in the right way, and there's not some sampling of other sports that are provided as part of our strategy there, we know that there's lots of evidence that early specialisation increases injury risk. And then the multi-environment exposure, I noticed this mostly with hockey, that there's lots of pathways and lots of opportunity externally to school for students to be able to engage with, which it creates a cumulative load that we need to be aware of in our environments and be able to manage accordingly and not just carry on providing more stress for those individuals. So 60 seconds then with the person next to you, we'll move on to how we understand what our environments look like. I just want you to have a little chat about what you understand about the injury picture in your environment currently, and are there any strategies that you use. Let's go for 60 seconds, let's go. Okay, we'll dive back in. Anyone want to share anything that they do currently within their environments? Anyone got any strategies they employ to understand the injury picture?
Yeah, we outsource our physio to the people just working towards City Football Club. They have their own private business. They come into school once a week. And we have access to triage for all sports scholars and all first team players for free for that triage, and then after that, they then, if there's follow-up appointments needed, they source that directly through to see a physio. Okay. So it's a win-win in the sense that we get them seen, we learn what's wrong with them, and we can help kind of collaborate with the physio, but then their rehab and all is run through the physio and they get the benefit of the business.
Yeah, nice, yeah. And I think that's a model that's worked well in quite a few schools and institutions, which is great. So hopefully there's some conversations around sort of capturing data and information through auditing. And auditing is a really, key area in terms of your injury prevention strategy and understanding where you want to direct your resources most efficiently year on year. We do in-house at Millfield just because like I said, we've got good resource and we're able to do that and look at things like the burden of injury within different sports, the trade-off between incidents and time loss of certain injuries in certain domains, and we're able to then direct our practice accordingly. But if you haven't got that sort of resource, there's two areas I would draw your attention to, which is one is Podium Analytics, which are a national government organisation set up to solve the problem of youth sport injury. They provide a free platform where you can log injuries within your environment, which then they can produce stats for you based upon this, but they use the data to inform the wider national picture around injury. And then some of you may use Return to Play already. They're a paid-for service, but as part of that, they will collect injury data for you and provide that back. I see some nods in the room, which they then allow, they'll give you that data back so you can make informed decisions about how you can move forward with your injury prevention. But again, if you haven't got loads of human resource, then outsourcing this auditing is worthwhile. What are the risk factors then? So we know what the picture looks like globally within our settings. What are the risk factors for each individual student? I was going to get you to do a little task, but I know we're sort of short of time, so I'll crack on with this next bit. But we're looking at sort of these, and you may remember from your studies, and risk factors from injury, intrinsic, extrinsic, modifiable, and non-modifiable. And really, we want to be targeting our interventions at what we can change and what we can modify. And as you can see on the extrinsic setting, first of all, is that two of the barriers that we talked about earlier, coach education and equipment, are things we can modify. So they shouldn't be barriers really, but we need to put more emphasis on addressing them. But largely from our primary prevention strategies, we're going to be looking at addressing the intrinsic factors within our students. So we're looking at their fitness, their strength, their biomechanical factors that we can address through some of the strategies we'll talk about in a second. But there's lots we can have an effect on. Things that aren't on there potentially is looking, especially with our early specialisation athletes, is things like peak high velocity monitoring, which we'll come on to later. But in terms of knowing when the pinch points in that growth and maturation process are for our athletes, so that we can pull back on the loading to ensure that they've got the right environment for them to develop properly without a heightened risk of injury. So what can be done? So these are the key things that I guess over the last 17 years I think probably are the best things we can go after. From the macro light touch work that we can do that will encompass a majority of our students, to the very specific cohort specific stuff that we can get into if we've got the resources. So we talked about education. I think having part of our coach education input around it, injury prevention strategies and workshops, and how we can upskill our coaches and our teacher coaches to be able to be comfortable enough to deliver this on a daily basis. But also empowering the students to be involved. They want to shape their experience of, especially education in general, but they want to shape their injury prevention experience. So getting focus groups or ambassadors within your student bodies to take on some of this shaping work and upskill their peers as well is really important for them to feel part of that journey. If we talk about neuromuscular warm-ups, a huge body of evidence in terms of this effectiveness, up to 75% injury risk reduction if you engage with some studies, some programs. And they are across a range of sports, from football to netball, and most of you will probably be aware of the RFU Activate. There's loads of resources associated with these programs. But again, the barrier of time. But what we know is there's a growing body of research that says although these programs are set up to be delivered for 20 minutes 3 times a week, actually there is a benefit from doing them for only 10 minutes if we pick the right components. Then actually the effectiveness is near the same as if you engage with the whole program. So we're already trying to find ways to address that barrier of time. But it needs coaching initially. but this is where your students can get involved and have a particular interest in this type of, if they're doing PE, for example, then they can take on some of this work once they're confident and comfortable with teaching the skills involved. Again, the long-term athletic development, I don't need to really preach about this, but having a well-structured model of athletic development and not getting your students just in the gym to lift heavy or, the old traditional fitness side of things is really important. It encompasses the growth and maturation and the status at any given time, and how we can maximise the qualities at certain points of that growth and maturation process is really important. And a huge body of evidence about athletic and development engagement in terms of reducing the risk of injury and enhancing performance. We talked about these enforced periods of time where our students are deloaded, and again we need to encourage you to be annual planning around competition periods. So we take rugby for example, off the back of a long summer, our students come back into school and expect to engage with competitive rugby scenarios straight away. So we need to be backward planning and look at that preparatory period over the summer and in the summer term. But again, we've got the chaotic mix of competition periods going on all at the same time with different sports. So we need to be clever about how we ensure our students are having time to prepare for the next competition period. We tend to look at these mesocycles at Millfield in terms of having, the repetitive mesocycles around injury prevention especially.
In the independent sector as an S&C for about 9 to 10 months, and then I done as an assistant S&C down at college in Denison College in Staffordshire. So then I moved over to further education sector, which, if those of you that work in it, it's a really strange sector of education because it fundamentally is a state sector, but further education is a business. Okay, so it operates similar to the independent sector, but has the kind of, I'll say, chief finance officer constraints of the state school. Okay, so you've kind of got this real hybrid of a mix. So this isn't going to be a talk on what metrics to use. So I wear the hat of, similar to what Kev said, fundamentally an S&T coach. I started professional rugby, went into the academic sector in terms of education. I then worked with some amazing coaches in that sector who challenged me to become more of a teacher, social learning theorist. And then I kind of flipped that on its head last September and trying to turn myself back into a sports scientist biometricist. Okay, so I have these kind of conflicts all the time. But this is all about a play on words with strategy. Okay, so when we do any kind of assessment with force, we're really looking at how that person does it, not just the kind of outcome of it, which is a really important consideration. So it's more just kind of looking at different avenues. I'll just do the next slide.
Yeah.
So just as an overview of Malton, so from a student population, we cater for 16 to 23-year-olds because we have a higher education provision as well. So we're kind of that bridge into senior sport. Okay, so we keep students with us. As those of you that work in the educational sector, it's about retention and kind of progressing them from 16 to 21. But fundamentally, if you are within an academy profile, we typically run rugby union, football and basketball. We do athletics and cricket as well, but they're kind of outsourced. Right, I've got my own views on it. But we focus heavily on these three sports. We have about 200 to 250 students that operate within that academy structure, training 3 lots of 90-minute skill sessions on Monday, Tuesday and Friday, and then 2 S&T sessions on top of that as well. We compete in national leagues, so again, those of you that are aware of the rugby kind of system, so our students are going to be competing back in the Ace League in September, so you're up and down the country, so every club that has an associate age programme, so you're now considering the travel as well. Our basketball compete internationally, so they go out 3 times a year to kind of Eastern Europe where the EYBL is held, so now we've got international travel that we're trying to conflict with. On top of that, you've got multiple stakeholders. Okay, so you've got parents, which I believe that the main drivers, and then similar to what other practitioners said, it's a relationships game. I'm going to come at this from a sports science S&C, but unless you've got that relationship, A with the student, B with the parents, and then the wider stakeholders, the sports science has less of an effect. Okay, so school, club, parents, and then if parent students are there at national level as well. So just kind of building on the back of Fion's work, so when This conference got announced before Hawkins' involvement, so I took this to Hawkins going, we need to talk about monitoring student athletes because this has to be an education focus. And if we can be part of that, then great. So at the start of the academic year, you've got this huge change in training load. Okay, I think what would be really nice, and it's rarely going to happen, is we could delay fixtures nationally. Okay, but as everyone knows here, that's probably going to be quite hard to do. So we've got this physical prepared due to lack of structured pre-season based on resource. Okay, so we're quite lucky. We've got the option to house students, so we've got residential rooms as well. So, but this was a barrier. We had to convince our hospitality to allow us to do this, which kind of that's the state part of sector I'm working in. But then you've got competitive stresses due to schedules, leading to potentially physical overload and fatigue. And I say potentially with kind of like a candid, it might happen. So, I took this idea from Joe Club at the Play Conference about 2 or 3 years ago. So, for those of you that were there, I've completely borrowed this from her. She overlaid 3 different sports, so NBA, NFL, and then I think English Premier League. This is one player's fixtures for the whole year. Okay, so I asked our football captain, under 19s, I'm presenting at a conference, I need some help. Could you just, any game involvement, what this isn't is 90 minutes. Okay, so just to be clear, it's not 90 minutes, we do rotate squads. But it's game involvement. Okay, those of you that play new, or have played in youth, what this could be evenings. Okay, so FA Flood League, you're talking finishing games at 9 PM at night. Okay, similarly, the Saturdays on there, we're not a Saturday school, so this player is playing men's football on a Saturday as well. He gets paid to do that. So he's getting between, I won't disclose this, his match fee, it's worth doing. Okay? For a 19-year-old who doesn't have a lot of resource and someone is offering him money to be on the football pyramid, it is worth doing. Then from the social learning side, how can I say no? Because school's more important, school sport's more important. We're dealing with a really difficult cocktail there. I asked him when he sent me this, how does Saturday influence you? Because for me, in my context, Wednesday games are our focus. Under 23s play on Monday, that's an FA-led thing. But Saturdays are my issue, because if you look at weekly periodisation, for me, Saturday and Sunday should be the loading days, because they're furthest away from the important fixture, and also we can take it towards Wednesday. But if they're playing on Saturdays, that's going to give me a slight issue, but I can't take it away. And this was his response. So it never feels fresh, which is an issue, but it has helped him. Okay, so we've exposed him, and it's in a relationship with the club we're happy with, which is another key part. So he never plays 100%. These are the concerning things. Okay, so we track information and then react following this. Okay, so next year, I've just seen a few people kind of go, that was my response. And this isn't one player, this is rugby, football, basketball, because all external clubs, and similar to that kind of want to play, this is what the system of I want to play looks like. This isn't saying he needs to play, this is a player who wants to play. So that's the issue. Out of interest, and if you look at Phil Foden's game appearances, he'd have stopped playing. He'd played 54 games this season, so February half term he's finished. Our player kept going. Okay, but I think the bigger issue is that huge August pre-season with men. So that's, to be honest, August I don't have a huge issue with because it wasn't full 90 minutes. December, massively light month, but it's that range. His average games was 2 per week. 13 weeks, I think he plays 4 games. No, I think it's 13 weeks is 3 games. So 3 and 4 feature far too often. Okay, so this is the picture we're dealing with in most. Now for the Hawkins bit, so biomechanics hat back on. So we have a system that can be used for multiple things. This is John McMahon's framework, so he's our Director of Education and Research. And the E typically stands for exercise prescription. Okay, so you could put someone through a testing battery, through post-assessment, and you could hopefully tell them what exercises to be focusing on. Okay, I'm challenging you guys, if you're using this tech, use it for education. Take the exercise prescription out of it and use this as a teaching moment. So if you're going to use any monitoring equipment, regardless whether it's force plates, whatever your resource is, use it for education and teaching moments. Just an overview of some of the tests that are kind of built into our system. So again, kind of more of a biomechanics Hawkins that one for this part. I'm only going to talk about the CMJ today because in my environment, both in my research, so I'm researching youth rugby league, and in the school environment, they have very similar constraints. Okay, 1 practitioner normally, 30 players frequently. Okay, so to be able to do all this with 30 players, good luck. Okay, let me know how it goes. But my advice with any assessment, and this is what I did with force assessment, I was quite lucky at Morton, we've had force players for quite a few years now. I did CMJ and just CMJ. I want to see what that looked like. Once I understood what that looked like, I introduced more tests. The more tests you've introduced, the less time you have for coaching. So again, there's that kind of balance. This is how it looks. So, and it's just an idea. So this is taken from Mladen Jovanović's weekly periodization, and kind of the +2 -1 element. But these are what you're dealing with a very chaotic environment. So we've got start of the week. So how students recovering from the weekend. So that player in question, if he's played 90 minutes, if it was a cup game, he's played 2 hours, what's his starting point for the week? Because if we don't know a starting point before training, we're adding to the problem. Okay, I think monitoring or injury risk reduction or anything you want to kind of band in this sector is, I coin the phrase firefighting with a water pistol. Because at times it can feel like that because you've got so many calls. So start of the week's key. What's the student's starting point and how are they recovering from the weekend? Recovering, take what phrase you want from that. I'm pretty sure after step 3 football, he's not practicing really good recovery strategies, doing his mobility, probably staying in the clubhouse with all the seniors. It's my kind of perception. End of the week, how are students responding to weekly load? If you're a Saturday fixture school, this is a really interesting point. Because if you have a start of the week and an end of the week, if you're able to implement tapering strategies and you've got evidence that it's working, you've got more evidence to support with your director of rugby, football, whatever your sport is, that it's working. Similarly, if it's not, you've now got evidence to support that we need to adapt our practice to shape for Saturday. Okay, so if our players are starting up here and they're ending down here, and by the way, they're going to go and play 80 minutes or 90 minutes the day after, that's the information you want to know. Pre and post match. So we did a little bit of in-house research again because of the higher education side of Molson, and we wanted to know the impact of particular possession on fatigue. And fatigue is a global term, and we're kind of looking at it from a neuromuscular point of view. But we wanted to see the influence of playing someone who is bottom of the league versus top of the league. Because if we're training one day, and they might, due to timetabling, have a training session on Tuesday, if they've been out of possession for 80% of the game, you should have data to back up where you need to adapt and practice. Okay, it's amazing. I'm quite lucky. I've worked with some really informed heads of sport, individual sports, that have took this information on board and they challenged me with foresight data to go show me if it makes a difference. And if I can show them your pressing players are done, then that could. Okay, that might change his equally involved with coaches that it might make not any difference. Okay, and then just the next point is more if you are that kind of Saturday school and your timetable permits, could you get something done on Thursday? Okay, this is kind of a typical match day -2 approach. And this kind of approach was taken from James Collins, who did it, if any of you were on this Force and Football seminar with Hawkins. This is our timetable. So same player, same program, so I'm trying to keep some consistency with the sport. So there are my 2 opportunities to get some useful information before and after the game. So Wednesday is our key game. I was involved about 4 years ago. If you have this influence and you have a head of sport or a head of school, similar to what Sue said at the start, if you have a sphere of influence over structure, grab it, because then you can influence that. We went from S&C and random places for different cohorts and classes to this structure, because we were identifying some of our talented players. If you wouldn't mind me saying, James Grayson kind of came through our system. His S&C was at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. He played Ace Rugby Wednesday, he trained at Saints Tuesday night. So Thursday he did nothing. Okay, so if you have influence to change structure, do so. So this is our opportunity. We've also got a day of rest, followed by a morning of lessons. So that Monday session is our really key session for getting good quality monitoring data. If we can do it, and it's kind of the facility and the logistics allow, I can also get a secondary point on a Friday. Because hopefully, we might not have this club training, a few education points and you can convince them not to. But convince them on the sake that it's going to prioritise Saturday. Okay, so this is not a perfect system, but it's one. So again, how has Saturday fixture influenced performance? And how has the Wednesday fixture / current week training impacted performance? Just an example of a framework that might work. Again, everyone's got their own context. We have our sessions, so it makes sense to kind of chunk those up. So warm-up and CMJ testing, we typically do fairly standardised, but that gives us a good opportunity. We split the group into two, so this is 12 and 12. So warm-up and CMJ testing, while the other group would do upper body and then core. We then flip that, and then the second half of the session goes into lower body. Right. This is just one way of doing it. I've seen some practitioners do all testing at the start, but those of you that teach and have coached for long enough, once you start doing jump testing or sprint testing, you've got 23 others that are either bored, distracting the person being tested, it's another validity issue. This is one structure that has helped us. I'm quite lucky that we have 2 coaches in every session. You can get to a point where students can lead the warm-up and CMJ testing, so you can then do the coaching, but it just takes a bit of education to get to that point. So this is kind of a flip of the argument. So my belief is that weekly assessment is the way forward, because it gives you more nuance on the inter-week relationships in terms of load and what we're kind of putting students through, or suggesting themselves to. So these are 3 individual time points. So we do our kind of structured testing at 3 time points. Typically in October, we don't test in week 1 because we want to know what that kind of. We try and treat the first half term as a pre-season. We go light intentionally, and then we kind of just before half term or just after half term, depending on timetable, we're trying to get some measure of assessment. Again, there's some rationale. If you don't have that prep period from an injury risk mitigation, should you be doing flat out max velocity sprints to get kind of your objective data, you kind of want to build into that. So this is the same player's data. So over an academic year, he's got heavier. The big thing for me is, again, just conscious of time, is if you just report jump height, so if you are looking at jumps, please make sure you're looking at impulse momentum, not flight time, and just be really accurate in what you're doing. But look at the more kinetic and the strategy metrics. So again, December was a light month. You remember on the kind of the shocking graphic, there's less games. He's using a much shorter strategy in terms of the time. Okay, so he's doing the movement in less time, which is really important. When you're starting to look at strategy metrics, and this is kind of the only thing I'll touch on metrics, and if you want in the seminar, I'm more than happy to go into depth with what metrics you might want to choose in certain scenarios. But strategy metrics inform you of how the person is doing the jump. He's also, and it looks trivial, but he's also going lower, almost 1.5 centimetres lower. So from a coaching point of view, he's taking longer to do it, he's going a bigger range of motion, and then from a force point of view, his mean force is near enough the same. Bearing in mind, he's 4 kilos heavier. Okay? I've said this to this player, and this is something else I'm fascinated in, is why don't students break? Because there's some that can sustain this and they don't get injured, but some that can't. And that's itself its own research question. He is lucky, very, very lucky. Okay, in the sense that he's played that level of games and he's not kind of deteriorated to the point where it could cause an injury in the acute phase in terms of that annual plan. What does that look like post into men's game? Because he's now gone from a very structured training where he's doing a lot, not a lot. He's now going to be training twice a week, Tuesdays to Thursday evenings, playing on Saturdays, without S&C. Okay, so again, could this inform education points? So when someone's strategy is lower, talk to them. Don't say your numbers are lower, don't make it about the data. Go, is there anything in the last 24 hours that has changed? Is there anything in the last week that has changed? Kind of keeping the theme of storytelling. I've had one player who, hopefully some of you have worked in education long enough to have a few of these in your head, but if you had to choose one person to step in front of a bus for, this student is that person, okay, in terms of everyone bought into him. Very aggressive, treated poorly in state schools, treated as a disruptive kid. He was looking after his 4 younger siblings at 17, and his strategy metrics absolutely crashed. That wasn't a conversation about, oh, your neuromuscular load is showing like fatigue. That was a conversation of, how can I help you manage this, which is a much bigger issue than S&Z, sport, fishes, all that stuff. Similarly, had another student was an unbelievable jumper. So just for context, 50 centimetres-ish for impulse momentum is a good jump. Okay, very talented jumper. But his strategy metrics went through the floor. He was a higher education student, and again, he won't mind me sharing this. He was cut off financially from his family, which I get, there's different levels of resource in here, okay, so I'm just kind of my own story. But he was then doing 12 hours a night, so from kind of 9 p.m, sorry, not 12, so probably from about 8 p.m. till 6 a.m. The higher education training, if I kind of go back to this, is the flip. So our higher education boys start at 8, because from a time-saving point of view, that's the only time to get it in. So if you are not monitoring, and I really, whatever you do, yes, I love force plates, that's kind of, with the logo, that's kind of, I'm invested in that, but start monitoring, please, because you get really good opportunities to have that level of insight, because you start seeing decrements on a weekly or within the week, you get to have more teaching moments. I would kind of whiz through just a key point. So at the start of the term, you can't know if you're making a noticeable change unless you understand what it looks like when they're fresh. Keep monitoring, testing, consistent and standardised. I'll go into this in the seminar to avoid repetition, but if all the person's jumps looks different every time they do it, your testing standardisation has to be really clear. So little things like if you're using force plates, if they're touching their toes, kind of makes the rest of the jump kind of invalid. You've got to be really hot on your standardisation. Review trends or individuals or squads following each term. Yes, do it by the week. If you can have influence to adapt the training week, great. Aaron spoke about this natural deload, what happened in that 12 weeks, because that could help the year after, because that's really important. Use the data to start conversation. So I battled hard when I started Malton, because I came in with this, that I'm an S&C coach for the independent sector, and my mentor at the time, I rang him, and I kind of said, they're trying to make me a teacher. He was like, it's the same thing. Okay, the context is, what we do is we teach S&C, we teach about nutrition strategies, kind of general masters hopefully, in terms of, we know a little about a lot. I think because if you're the one person, use the opportunity to teach. Just a graphic for those of you that go further south than Northampton, apologies because this looks minor compared to your trouble. But there's loads of different ways someone can get to the same result. Okay, you could look at a 40 centimetre jumps and they could look completely different when you look at the strategy. Strategy is ultimately how we know A, how athletes are adapting, B, are they fatigued, and what is causing that adaptation. Progression from this, and again I'll just kind of leave this on there, and this is where I think the collaboration comes forward, both with LBU from external companies. So we're in an opportunity to fund a force assessment study, whatever that looks like is up to the individual student. At Malton, I'm going to start running a weekly load response project, so across those 3 sports, across those 2 time points, for the first term and the second term. And then individual case studies, so that when we're in this position next year, it's not a hypothetical, you could look at, this is how it's implemented, this is what it looks like. Okay, I've kind of whistled through as much as I can, conscious of the time, and I think questions are more informed part of most talks. So if you want to contact me from this point, by all means scan that, I've got other things that you can contact me on. I'm more than happy to talk about force assessment, monitoring, school S&C, anything, because I think it does help when you collaborate with other schools. Okay, and that's literally my part, so thank you for your attention, and I'll look forward to
No, I think one of those things I think we say a lot within research is only hypothesis until we collect data to actually inform and prove what we're doing. And I think that really advocates for a lot of this work is, again, you might have inklings in your environments and you might think things are happening, but unless we monitor and we collect data on it, can you really prove that? And is it actually true, or is it just your hypothesis of how you're feeling? And I think on our side is, can we be proactive and not reactive within these injury settings? I think school settings were very much a reactive environment. Oh God, people get injured. Can we put these strategies in place now? Because we know of this kind of psychosocial effects that it might have, but also as well within schools, and there's something that we see probably quite a lot is how many times do we just carry an injury through a year and we don't address it there? And then I think comes that secondary thing around, can we make a small problem not a big problem? And it's something for us to think about within our practices. So we have about 10 minutes for questions, so either to Aaron or Tom. But also this is an opportunity if we want to discuss, it's an open forum. So If you have some direct questions, please do, but also if people want to pipe in with their own experiences as well, feel free to do that. So, does anyone want to start? Mark?
I couldn't not, Tom, could I? Thanks, Tom. Having kind of been in the FE space myself and mentioned things about just doing like a one time point weekly assessment, how competent a jumpers have you got that you can reliably trust that metric, that strategy you've got is a true reflection of their actual fatigue, or is it just a case of actually on this particular day they've got a different jumping strategy because they are lacking in jumping reliability, lacking in jumping competence?
So I think that's probably more of an argument for not doing individual days, because you could say the same about sprintability based on fatigue, because kinematics would go out the window based on fatigue. So I think what, from my own research point of view and how I'm going to implement this at Malton, is that when you have that opportunity where there's less noise, so that it might be low fixtures, it might be the week after half term, you work out what their reliability is between 2 time points. So I would look at, if you can, and it's a big if, but from a research application into practice, if you can test 2 or 3 times within the same week where they're less fatigued, I'm not going to say they're not fatigued, but you kind of get a bandwidth of what's normal. My advice with this is, you see, if you look at the kind of Hawking systems or other systems, it's outside 2 standard deviations, typically gets flagged as red. Kind of amber would be within 1, and then kind of it would say the same, or green if you've improved to go the other way. So until you know what that individual range is, I think that's the first point of call. So it's not just taking that single assessment at when they're fresh, it's can I do this? So in my structure, could I go Monday, Friday of that first week, because they're never not going to be influenced. And I think that's the same for any testing. That answers your question somehow. Felt like my Viva for a second.
John?
One for Aaron, please. What does your work look like in terms of pupils who are pre-maturation going through puberty and then post-maturation? How does your work differ, essentially?
Yeah, it's probably that pinch point. So we've got 1,300 students at Milford. I'm not going to sit here and say that we assess every student for growth and maturation. I'm not going to say that. I think we target that in those interventions around, and again, the reliability of assessing that on the equations that we've got without X-ray in everybody's hand to know exactly where they are. You're guesstimating on that bit. So we target that in terms of specific populations around our cricketers, our tennis cohorts, and our swimmers, because we've got more resource around those individuals and because they're very specialised programmes, and we know the injury risk around our cricketers is a lot higher for lower back stress injuries. So we target groups rather than do it en masse, for sure. But what we've developed, if this answers the question, I'm not sure it does, but what we've developed is that understanding with coaches about why we're doing that and when, and the recommendation is that they pull back on that physical stress and physical stimulus. So what we might do for bowlers, for example, is go, okay, you're going through peak high velocity. The coaches technically will reduce their bowling load through that time, and then they might have a bit more of a physical block with our strength conditioning group to ensure that they're still getting that stimulus that they need through that growth, that peak high velocity period, but they're not heightened injury risk through that period of time. So it's very targeted, and I'm not a strength conditioning expert, but Phil might be in it, but the work that we do based on that long-term, that youth athletic development model will be nuanced based on where they are in that phase of growth and maturation.
I think just to piggyback on that, I think that education piece is really important that Aaron talked about, because if you don't educate the coaches, they don't understand why do I need to strip back my volume. And I think it's that long-term vision. I think within schools it's really important that we think long-term, we don't think short-term, we don't think about our school fixture on Saturday. We think about the long-term development, and that's the point of this conference, of that kid. And at that period of time, stripping back and allowing them to get the physical development they need, in the long term, you're going to get more output out of them. And I think that's kind of maybe a message as well, is that long-term vision, but also that coach education, because I think we probably, in S&C coach, and I know there are some coaches in this room, I work with the Queen Ethelbergers a lot, and we probably expect the coaches to know these things. But unless we educate them, how do we expect? They're not educated in the same, they've gone on sports coaching degrees. We've gone on S&C or, physiotherapies degrees. So we can't expect them to have the same level of understanding that we have. And unless we educate them and work with them, then they'll understand that. But we can't expect them to have that level of understanding without that education piece. If that makes sense.
One of the slides I missed out on was about the multi-sport athlete. So we, very much similar to that point, is we created a set of non-negotiables based off some IOC consensus documents, because our multi-sport athletes were getting overloaded, especially during those periods of time. So what we did is create a set of non-negotiables for our coaches, so that in those silo-based environments, they're not overloading the students, and we're fortunate with the resource. We had one practitioner who was able to oversee that. But that might look slightly different in different environments and different, especially. But that was something that got on top of, and we utilised that a little bit more with our students in peak fibrosity as well, in terms of just managing their own.
Yeah.
Aaron, how did the physio infrastructure grow within Millfield? We're trying to push for some physio inclusion, but we're trying to get some kickback from it.
So I inherited it. So one of our director of sports came in and felt that we were outsourcing externally, as was alluded to over there, and the money was going out of the school, and we felt that could come back into the school by employing practitioners and bolster a service that was a bit more embedded within the environment. At the moment, our service is a paid-for service additionally, so it's but it can be recouped through insurance policies and things like that. So there is a self-sufficiency to it. Now, I was up front with the school when I started and said, if S&C and physio do their job right, eventually we'll make a loss because we won't be seeing as many students, and that's what we want. But that seems to work for now, that we've got enough. We've got enough of a student body, and although we're trying to implement this stuff, there's still stuff that happens, it still goes wrong. So there's enough students coming through that we bolster the service with that income generation. But it's not, don't get me wrong, it's not a service where I'm trying to extort wealthy parents for money. It's a case of I don't want to be seeing students as much as possible. So actually, if they don't come through the door, that's great from a development point of view, and I don't want to be seeing them in that sense. But it can work in-house quite well. But it depends on, again, like you said, financial constraints of the school and the environment, for sure.
So it's an adult, so physio service within Millfield, we're talking adult service?
Yeah, that gets paid for, yeah. So, with the 20% coming in, we might be looking for a job.
Just to build on that, so when I first started Malton, we had a physio, but then similar model, like students pay for it. But we were kind of subsidising half the payment. This financial offset didn't go our way in the first 2 years, so then everything just went out the window very quickly. Then we started, so me as a single practitioner in those days was kind of going, I'm not a physio, that's not my skill set, it's not my remit, and there's too many to do it badly. So I built a good relationship with Northampton Uni, who are very close to us, and it's working out in your area. And I get like the Midlands and then look at, so this, Leeds Beckett is a good idea for research and practitioners, but universities are crying to get students 150 hours. They run accredited courses that must have 150, sometimes it's like 200 hours, depending on the certification. So there is scope for, if you can work with we will develop the student in this way. It's not perfect, it's not a chartered physio, but it's a starting point. What that's now led to is we fund 2 physios that come in 6 hours a week. So they do 2 clinics in that training time, so at exactly the same time, so we don't have to worry about students missing lessons. They oversee students. So now we have 2 physios that we pay, so that we pay them an hourly rate, that's a fixed term contract. But then we have, and again it's blessed with facilities, we've got a physio room with 8 beds in it. So if you've got 2 chartered physios that you're paying hourly, that are overseeing 8 students who you're developing the skill set of and getting their hours up. So start looking at universities, in my advice, that are close to you, close enough to drive, or if you fund expenses, however you want to dress it up. But it's so hard for students to get placements. They are crying out for it. And if you can advertise the S&C component and the skill delivery along that side as well, you're making a better practitioner. So it's bringing in stakeholders that aren't then following that up with invoices. But it's how you dress it up. That'd be my approach. I really would, because it's helped us so much. It's justified us now paying people. Again, long term, I want full-time, 9 to 5, but...
and I think on the point there, it's like your long-term vision is obviously to have a physio, and I think we would all dearly want physios in our environments, and they're massively beneficial. But in the short term, the stuff that Aaron's just pointed on, the warm-ups and stuff, that's what you can start next week. You know what I mean? So I think about your long-term goals as when we go away from here, and what you want long-term, which might be a really good physiotherapy situation within your school. But in the short term, what can you do? Let's not wait a year for something to be implemented. What are the short-term things you can also do while you're working on those bigger projects? That's kind of something as well that I'd advocate for. Everything else? Yep.
Yeah, so currently we're running quite a big senior rugby program at my school at Mac, and we train Monday, Thursdays, and then play Saturdays. And a lot of the students also play club on Sundays, so they come back pretty broken up, and like still some of our lads are playing like academy levels, and they come back and still play. So when would you, sort of question for all three of you, when would you suggest putting injury prevention into their schedule if that's the sort of challenge that you're being faced with? Because that's what I've got at the moment, where I've got 15, 20 students who are doing it, and a drop-off of our injuries last year was massive.
What year group did your school start?
We start from year 7 go all the way to year 13.
So my first thing would be, what are you doing at year 7?
Okay.
As in, like, that robustness and that foundations is like that kind of upward trajectory. I think it's, can you get them already then when they're into that situation, already got a level of robustness. So one of the things that something I'm actually talking about next week at the IC Education Conference is around, we're basically seeing these kids are doing this and then their load just goes like that, but they don't have the robustness and the load already to manage it. So can we introduce earlier, and then hopefully by the time they get that, they have more of a basis. So that would be my first approach. I don't know if anyone else is.
No, you go. Just really shortly, similar, find windows of opportunity. So similar with the warm-ups, at some point, if it's a games or if it's a PE session, find opportunities for 5-10 minutes. Theme it however you want. We used to SAQ drills at Denison, and it was a student, years 8, it was like wizard, goblins and orcs, essentially, rock, paper, scissors. But like, it was their idea. So if you're trying to get a stimulus in there, 5-10 minutes enough over the weeks. Look at the longitudinal gain of doing
little and often almost.
Yeah, but I would say that, so my view of the most robust players is because they've had 5 to 10 years of a little and often. Unfortunately, my students are a lot and often. But the ones that don't break, the ones in our environment that have played cage football, they've played basketball till 10 p.m. at night, their training history is huge, but it's just not under a club, and don't discount that. So education first, and why you're doing it, and supplementary resources. YouTube is free, you can film yourself doing the most awkward videos you've ever imagined, but if it's enough to get a visual stimulus, go for it.
Understood.
I think the last point on that is goes back to sort of collecting the data bit. So use that, if you're able to audit the number of injuries that are coming through and show that data to coaches. I had that when I started at Milford, the traditional programme that they played Wednesday, Saturday, and it was relentless, and kids are everywhere. And it took us a number of years to collect enough data to show the coaches that wasn't appropriate, and obviously using other resources and other research to back up the fact that they needed those days off in between to recover. And now we've changed that programme, so there is one competition point a week for our rugby programme, for example. So a combination of those things, collect the data, go with evidence, and present that evidence. And we know from sort of a Leicester City piece years ago that the better players are available more often, better performance outcomes for the coaches. That's what they want. So actually, if we sell that on those stats, then help you as well.
Thank you.
And I think that's a really good way to end from Aaron's point there.